welcome to the National Education Union's Leadership Zoom meeting this evening. My name is Amanda Martin and I am the President of the National Education Union, and I firstly want to start by saying thank you very much for joining us this evening. I'm going to run through some housekeeping and then do a short introduction before I introduce our two panellists today. So firstly, we are recording this call, so if anyone is not able to listen to all of it, you can catch up later or contact us and we'll be able to send it to you. We also record all of the chat so that and the questions so that we can look at them when we're developing our advice and listening to what the members want. In the chat has been a behaviour code posted. It's the NEU behaviour code on working with online meetings, so please make yourself familiar with that if you've not seen it before. The format of today's evening is in a webinar format, which means that you'll only be able to see the panellists. You'll also see some names that will come up, and they are our tech team, and I'll introduce those in a moment. But you won't be able to see yourselves, although we do want you to absolutely participate. And so how we'd like you to do that is to use the chat function to make any comments, to ask for any information, and our tech team will be able to post the links that you might well need in there. Also make any comments to how we can further support you. And as we get to the end of the call, please let us know if it's been helpful and valuable and if you'd like to do this again. We'd also like you to participate with regards to questions, and on your screen there will be a Q&A button. So if you click in there and if you want to ask a question, if you can put your name and where you're from, that would be brilliant, and then ask your question, and then they will be collated by our tech team and put forward to me to read out to our panelists or to answer if I can as myself. We do have a tech team. I've mentioned them a few times already. This evening's tech team are Nikki, Amy, Marie, Dorothy, Vin and Mike, and they will be working to help you in the chat and also to help you with the questions and answers to make sure they come through. And our signer today is Sam Riddle. So thank you very much. That's the housekeeping. And I just want to start with a kind of a quick introduction. I know that for some of you, since lockdown, life has been pretty relentless. You've had pressure from so many angles, whether that's governors because they're nervous to open, or they want to know everything, even if you don't want the answers, or you don't know the answers, or they're wanting to open completely. And I know that would have been a big pressure for you. I also know that whether you're a local authority or a maintained school or academy, you would have had a mixed picture. Some of you would have had a great deal of support from your local authority or your MAT, and others would have felt a great deal of pressure. There's also the pressure that comes from other schools around you in your area. And so we know that you've also had that, not to mention press, whether that's national or local, very much wanting to know what's going on. I think this time more than ever, we've seen that during the COVID-19. But you'll also have, and I guess as leaders, in schools, probably one of the largest pressures is from the parents. And for everyone who asks you to open and why you closed in the first place, you'll have another parent that's saying, why are you even thinking about opening and putting my child in danger? A great deal to juggle in a time where we know that government evidence, government guidance, government information, whether that's from the DfE or from government finance, you've had over 300 documents since the start of lockdown, since the start of this crisis, and it's not become very timely. Many of it coming late at night, many of it repeating, many of it reissued guidance without highlighted areas to say what you're reading that's brand new. And I know that for some of you, not being able to work with your NEU members or school reps might well have been difficult and caused some difficulties in your situation. And others of you, I also know, because you've emailed me, collaboration between your reps and your staff and yourself has been a lifesaver with regards to your own sanity. So one thing, I guess, highlighting all of that is it will depend on all of those things, plus your school catchment, plus your region, plus your R rating, plus whatever phase you're in, whether you're considering wider opening for one group, 3 groups. it will mean that there isn't one case scenario across this country. We asked for phased opening, we asked for consideration, we asked for people to be able to do what's right with regards to safety in their own school. And that has meant that tonight on this call, you won't have everybody in the same situation, but we do hope that we'll be able to support you. And we hope that you're finding the National Education Union's support helpful. The union today has produced and completed a draft, I'm not sure whether it's been emailed out yet or it will be after this, on ensuring safety for staff and at higher risk, and also alongside some guidance for joint guidance for leaders and reps on risk assessments. So apologies, it's more guidance, and apologies it's come out again not in one format, but the NEU have produced their guidance based on when government guidance comes out. We want to read it and make sure that our information is helpful and supportive and runs alongside, for example, our primary and secondary checklists that came out. They were very detailed and we considered everything that the government said in writing those, but we hope by putting them on an app, we've made them workable and allowed leaders and reps to work together and identify the concerns. Another thing just before I finish that we're hoping to do is holding regional versions of these Zooms using our Leadership Council to facilitate those so that we can have a look at what's going on in regions, particularly as we see very many differences across regions, whether it's councils being very supportive or our ratings changing dramatically across regions. So we will be looking to do that. I've got two members that are going to speak to you now, two people that are going to speak to you now. The first one will be Bevan. He is the National Education Union's Vice President, but he's also a school leader. And then I've got Amanda Brown, who is the Assistant General Secretary for the National Education Union. Robin's going to say a few words on his perspective as a leader, and then Amanda's just going to outline what's in the new guidance. And then we're going to hand over to you with questions. So do feel free to post questions and we'll hand over to you. So thank you very much, Robin.
Thank you very much, Amanda. And as you say, my day job is as head teacher of a large secondary school in Essex. So I have a very full understanding, a shared understanding of the challenges that you as leadership members in our National Education Union are facing. And it's my privilege to serve as National Vice President this year. I want to build on some of Amanda's comments and just offer you a few further general thoughts to help shape your thinking at this time. And the first is to emphasize that as a union, we have a very clear set of principles around ethical leadership, around making sure that as leaders, our decisions are guided by a moral compass, by doing what's right, by being caring, by being supportive of colleagues, supportive of families, and of having a really clear sense of purpose in the education we provide. And when each of us is facing individually a different context, whether that's by phase, by location, by multi-academy trust or independent school, when we're facing different contexts, the thing that should steer us first and foremost are our principles and our ethics around supporting and providing care in the schools that we're leading. And building on that, the second thing that I think I ought to say and want to say is that if, like leaders, you feel anything like I do right at the moment, you will be exhausted. You will have found the relentless nature of the last few months with every single thing from delivering education remotely, supporting families remotely, making provision for the most vulnerable, planning for reopening and then pulling back from planning for reopening, and managing this at a time where everything that we do, interviewing staff for new jobs, managing the finances of the institution, managing the premises, with all of that going on, one of the things that we've got to be really clear about is the importance of what I would call leadership self-care. So making sure that you are supported by your governors in the decisions you're making, that you're supported in terms of your well-being, and being frank that you are looking after yourselves. So number one, any decisions you make should be driven by your ethics. Number two, making sure you're looking after yourself. Third thing to say is as all of us in our different ways are planning and looking at how we're going to be reintegrating pupils into our schools, I think there's also a third principle, and that is that as pupils are coming back, as children and young adults are coming back into schools and colleges, every single one of those returns must be framed in a way that makes it positive, sustainable, and worthwhile. Because what matters here is the lifelong experience of education, attitudes towards education, and we want to be sure that when pupils are back in our classrooms, that they want to be there and that they continue to be motivated by the education we're providing. And finally, before I think Amanda will guide you on to some comments from Amanda Brown, before that, there is one other principle, and that is that we all stand together as members of the largest education union in Europe. And we stand together because we share those common values, but also because collective and cooperative solutions to the challenges that we face make us stronger. We are stronger when we work with our fellow staff members to come up with considered and informed solutions. We're stronger when we have the backing of the union in terms of high quality advice and guidance, and we're stronger when we move together on those more difficult decisions that we all face. So as we're talking tonight, I hope those set a little bit of the framework within which the advice we're going to offer will follow. Thank you.
Thank you, Robin, very much. I mentioned that we've got 2 pieces of information that are coming out very, very imminently, unless they have already. And I know that we've seen the final drafts of those today. And I'm going to bring in Amanda Brown just to highlight what's in them, because as I mentioned, over 300 pieces of information that you've had to digest, work out what's best for your school, for your situation. We hope that our advice is helpful, and we hope that it's accessible, but we thought we'd introduce that here and give Amanda just an overview of what's in there. Thanks, Amanda.
Thanks very much. So yes, we hope that providing this is helpful. That's certainly the intention. We do appreciate that there is so much going on, so much to read, so much to check through, but we hope that these guides will assist in you carrying out your role.
That's much better, isn't it?
There's no water, then water free there.
Sorry, I've just stopped because I could hear something in the background. So the first one I want to highlight is some guidance around risk assessment. Now, you'll be aware that we have provided, as Amanda said, we provided a number of checklists, very detailed checklists actually, for our union reps, essentially to look at the kinds of things that we expect to be in place, to be considered by school leaders, by employers, to make sure that schools and other settings are safe. As Robin said, I think what we mostly want to do is to make sure, this is the most important thing for us, that we all want to make sure that everywhere that pupils are, that school settings, college settings are safe, and really working together to find that. So we have 2 things. We have the checklists, which are primarily directed at union reps, but this risk assessment guidance is primarily for leadership members, because it's really around the things that we expect to be provided for in a risk assessment. Risk assessments are the legal obligation of employers and therefore head teachers, school and principals. And so it's intended to try to help you find your way through the expectations of your employers and others in setting up the things that you should be considered. So it considers things like site issues, site safety. It considers things like how you might arrange staffing. It considers things like arrangement of classrooms, and also things like actually sourcing PPE or other necessities where that's important. So it tries to lead through the kinds of things that should be in a risk assessment, but doesn't actually tell you the detail of that, because of course all of that will be site specific and school and college specific. So it's very much about telling you the things that you will have to consider, but not necessarily giving you the detail of all of that, although other materials do have that. So that's the first of the documents that Amanda mentioned. It should be on the website either now or very soon, and we will be emailing everybody to say it's there. The other issue that we've finalised guidance on is what has so far been called the issue of vulnerable staff and vulnerable pupil, but we're moving away from that kind of language. And the reason for that, I've just seen a question pop up which relates to that. There are two terminologies around vulnerability that the government use. One is extremely clinically vulnerable and one is clinically vulnerable. But as well as that, there are, of course, those groups and members of your staff, as well as pupils, who will be at particular risk. And as the science develops, we know that, for example, Black members of staff, certainly the families of Black pupils, will be at higher risk. We know that people with certain conditions and certain ages, of course, will be at particular risk. And what is emerging is the complicated interplay of all those factors. So in our guidance around higher risk members of staff, what we're talking about really is how you approach assessing that. Because as part of the risk assessment, you'll also be assessing not only the collective of the school community, but also individual members of staff. So it's an approach to that. And it is particularly directed at our members. It's saying to them, if you have particular concerns about your own safety, then raise these, talk to your head teacher about it, raise these with the school so that you can work through a way of making sure that the head teacher is aware of those, but you're also taking your own safety into account and keeping yourself safe. So it's about, again, that working together to find safety. So happy to answer any further questions on that if people have it, but those two bits of advice should be out. If they're not up on the website already as I speak, then they should be out very soon. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'll go straight to some questions because we've got quite a few coming in. So I'll take a question from Nikki first in Oldham. Will the NEU be publishing dates for review of the NEU 5 tests? Our school risk assessment explicitly cites that these tests should be met before we open more widely. Having dates when the NEU will be reviewing the 5 tests will be really helpful to help parents and governors understand the review process. And the second question comes from Jen Harvey. I am hearing rumblings about the schools being open during the summer holidays. I am concerned about some colleagues who haven't had a break since February, and that probably includes a lot of you on this phone call. What is the union's position on summer holiday opening? And then a question from John Connolly in Shropshire. There has been lots of discussion in the Leadership Council meetings about the level of support and information provided to senior school leaders by the NEU. Much of this discussion has been negative comments about the level of support. Could I ask the team what actions the NEU executive will take to guarantee improved support moving forward? Thank you. Robin, I'll come to you first, and then Amanda, if you can fill in any gaps that Robin leaves. Thanks.
I'll do my best to just take us through those 3 questions. First of all, starting with the 5 tests. The 5 tests remain highly relevant. You can pick them up very easily just by doing a quick Google search for NEU 5 tests COVID-19. And they cover a range of different aspects of what the union considered to be necessary before we engaged in wider school opening. And of course, the campaign over the last several weeks has been around making sure that the wider opening was not premature, and that as and when we had a phased opening, it was safe in each of the localities where it's happening. And of course, what we're now dealing with is a situation where there are some parts of the country where schools haven't reopened. There are some parts where they're partially open, and in some other places, significant numbers of schools have moved ahead with the reopening. And that actually, in part, reflects the tests that we originally cited. So we were looking for much lower numbers of COVID-19 cases. Now, of course, that is beginning to happen, but it's not happening uniformly. So my first very practical piece of advice here is you should, through your school leader, through your MAT, through your head teacher, make sure you have contact with your local director of public health, because that is the independent person. There was a question earlier on the chat feed around local R rates. It is that person who can provide you with local context-sensitive information around the situation for your school. We know, and this was test number 2, I won't go into detail on all the tests, but test number 2 was about a national plan for social distancing. The guidance from the DfE is not as clear as it should be, but the vast majority of schools are interpreting it in an intelligent way, where they are maintaining physical isolation between different groups, and they are maintaining individual distance between individual pupils so far as that is possible. And there are clear associated recommendations for PPE. There are other elements of our 5 tests that haven't been met, and that includes adequate test and trace, and a clear strategy nationally for that. But on the final test, which is about protection for the vulnerable, you'll have heard what Amanda Brown was saying a few moments ago. The guidance is there. Our guidance is strong. Our guidance is robust. It's ready to use, and it actually provides that protection. Going on to the other questions, I just need to flip back a page. There we go. Summer holiday opening, NEU position, absolutely clear for employed teaching staff and support staff. No, absolutely no. Now, that doesn't mean that we don't care for the young people who attend our schools, and it doesn't mean that there might not be other ways in which there can be provision for them that might happen to be in our buildings. But it is not the case that any member of teaching staff or support staff should be required or expected to be undertaking that work during the summer holidays. And finally, John, you're quite right. There were some messages that came out from the NEU that perhaps were not entirely as helpful as they could have been in their tone, not in their content, but in their tone, as helpful as they could have been towards leadership. However, the NEU is hugely supportive of its leadership members. I was talking with Kevin Courtney just the other day. I know Amanda has been recently as well. And we were talking about what more could we do to make sure that the support that we show to our leaders is really visible. And it is there. It's absolutely there. The advice and guidance is the best you can get. And in fact, sometimes being a leader within the NEU gives you additional strength, because you know that the stance you are taking and the advice you're following is the same advice that's going out to support staff members, to teachers within your school. So actions are being taken to improve the way in which some of the communications are coming forward. I know Kevin has apologised around that previously. I think what we've got is a really good package for sustaining advice for our school leaders. I'll leave it there. Amanda may want to come in.
Did you want to add anything further, Amanda?
Well, I think Robin's answers have been very comprehensive. If I could, I'd just underline 2 points again, that we really are seeing a move towards the local, and we're seeing differences emerging clearly across the country in terms of the R rate. We don't necessarily always have very up-to-date figures on that, however. So Robin's point about being in touch with the Director of Public Health is of key importance for that. And summer holidays, yes, we are clearly, in terms of teachers and support staff won't be working in the way that they would normally, that their contracts wouldn't allow that over the summer holidays. But we do want to look at innovative projects, some of the summer schemes that local authorities certainly used to, and other schools Matt may have put on some or participated in some kind of summer schemes, because clearly it's important that we encourage pupils to feel that they can have some kind of link-ups with their friends from school, and also that we try the best we can to make sure that they feel linked in with the notion of school, even if it's not actually education and their normal school life. So we are certainly looking at making some alliances with other organisations about what we can do to try and promote that.
Thank you very much, you two. Okay, so I've got some more questions. This is from Carrie Anson in Reading. We have been provided with an NHS employee risk assessment based on demographics, i.e. age, gender, ethnicity, health conditions. Does the union have one of those? Question from Shushili Behandri. What happens if safety guidelines according to government unions and borough is being met on June the 15th, but some staff say they will not come in because of childcare or because they are still worried? Some are saying it's union advice. What do we do then, and where do we stand then as a leader? And then Jill, We have reopened more widely today to our reception children. We are at full capacity with the staff we have. At what point should or can we ask staff to reassess if they feel able to come into school? If currently not supporting working in school because of union guidance, if more key worker children need places, would the NEU guide us to shut down our reception bubbles to allow enough staff, or signpost key worker services to other borough services? And David Ritchie, in terms of the DFE guidance, how do you define vulnerable? My head teacher is using this as a reason to bring back more children, particularly non-EHCP, but SEN year 2 and year 5. What should I do? Vulnerable to me refers to those children who we have concerns in relation to safeguarding only. So I'll come to you first. Amanda, do you want to answer any of those?
Thanks, Amanda. Yes, I will. The first question around the NHS employee risk assessment and how to deal with that. In the guidance, which we keep saying is about to or has just been published, at the back of that there is a graphic which helps to explain those factors which you should be taking into account, and hopefully is a kind of graphic representation of the advice that's in the document. So there is something there that should assist with that. The next question around safety guidelines. So the guidelines are being met, but some staff say they won't come in because of childcare or other reasons. Obviously, there may be a collective approach for the school. There'll be a rate at which there'll be the R rate locally, but as well as considering the generality of teachers, you'll also need to consider whether staff have particular health needs. And it's that mix of the interrelated factors of comorbidities, of age, of whether of race, whether people are black, and of all those factors that that will need to be taken into account. So the fact that there may be that the region may be safe, or if the guidelines have been met, doesn't mean that any individual members of staff may not still be at higher risk. And when I say higher risk, I'm also referring to the last question, which asks about definition of vulnerable. So the government has different definitions of that. There is clearly the definition of vulnerable in relation to pupils and safeguarding. But in relation to COVID-19, there is the extremely clinically vulnerable group. Those are the people who've had a letter from the government to say that they should that they should keep isolated. Then there is the next group, which is the clinically vulnerable group, who have certain other either undergoing treatment, or they have various conditions which mean that they are at higher risk. And then there are other people who aren't on those lists, but who will also have particular things in either in their own life, or perhaps have family members at home, which would mean that they are in a higher risk or a special category. So it's about the balance of all those. That's one of the reasons we've moved to different language, moving away from vulnerable to higher risk, because we think that clarifies the difference around that. And then finally, the question around being at full capacity, but there being other pupils who are seeking to come in, more key worker children. This, I would say, is something which really needs to be considered more broadly within your local area. If you are at capacity, safety capacity, then you shouldn't be accepting other staff. Some of the other pupils, some of the legal framework about admission of pupils has been relaxed during this period, so that schools can work together and within local areas. So I would say, I'd be interested to see Robin's advice. I haven't been asked this before, but I think very much that if you are at capacity, then you shouldn't be accepting other children.
Thank you. And Robin?
I'll just underline that with something that's probably fairly obvious to the people on this call, because you're all in school leadership, but it's the fact that the risk assessment side of this, the decisions that you're making about who you're providing education for on site, and the logistics all have to go hand in hand, absolutely hand in hand. So if, for example, you have decided, I'm going to take a secondary context, you've decided that you're going to admit from a certain date so many year 10s and so many year 12s, and you've got a risk assessment to match that. If later there is a decision to look to see if you can increase the number of pupils on site, the risk assessment needs to be looked at again. They go together. So back to Jill's question, if you are at full capacity, that means that you are currently providing for all the pupils that you can. And it may be you're at full capacity because your buildings don't allow more. It may be you're at full capacity because that's your toilet and hand washing facilities. It may be it's the number of available staff you've got. There can be various reasons, and each one of those is a reason why you wouldn't take any more pupils. It's right and proper in leadership to look to see whether there are opportunities to extend the offer to more pupils and whether that's right and whether it's right in your context. But your limits are always going to be around the logistics, the provision of staff, the buildings, adequate sanitizing, hand washing and cleaning. Cleaning is one that doesn't often get mentioned, but it has to be there as well. So it's not a clear-cut answer, but it's an answer that says link those pieces together, logistics and risk assessment, and then you'll see whether there is capacity to do more. And if you're under pressure from someone more senior, a MAT leader, or a chief exec or a head teacher, if you're under pressure to open more widely and you haven't been given that rationale, just ask for it, work through it together, explain your concerns just in a straightforward, ordinary way. I don't think this will work because.
Yeah, absolutely. And as Robin said, and as I put in the chat earlier, risk assessments are absolutely working documents and will be changed as situations change, as particular individual pupils maybe come in that need a further risk assessment done on them, as well as on staff as we're going forward, plus the situation that you're in locally. I've got some more questions, but firstly, I'm going to answer one from Tom in Birmingham and Lindsay in Kirklees, both of them asking the same kind of questions around not getting information from their local authority. We put the link into public health, and one of them saying their public health and local authority joined up together. We've put the link into the public around public health into the chat, so have a look on there. But I would absolutely say on the back of your membership card is the person locally to contact to have that conversation. And you won't be alone in your local authority not getting that information. So group together with other heads, whether they're in the NEU or other union, and have that conversation. But I would absolutely say contact your branch and get some, or branch or district, and get them to help you in supporting and pushing for finding out, for example, the R number, the R rating that's in your area. So absolutely don't be alone in doing that if you're facing a brick wall. Okay, so I've got some more questions. Liz is, what is the union's view on bubbles? Only be sent home after a positive test. Tests are taking several days to come back and children and staff will then be vulnerable for a few days. If we are not supposed to send bubbles home if there's a positive test. Government guidance is clear. We should only send bubbles home after a positive test. So what's the union's opinion on that? Claire from Sunderland. The local authority have been communicative and clear that decisions made by the head teacher will be supported. The pressure for myself and colleagues has come from partner agencies in places like social care and health. What can the NEU do to help leaders manage their pressure and enable partner agencies to understand our context in managing the risk for a wider opening and not their own agenda? And question from Jill, are we still bound to complete appraisals and written end of year reports for pupils? Do you want to take those three first and then I'll bring in two others? Robin, I'll come to you first.
Okay, first of all, much to everybody's frustration, some new advice came out from the department just a couple of days ago on the reports. I think many of us were anticipating a kind of more reasonable approach in which it was accepted that grading and other information that gone home earlier in the year would be sufficient. The advice that has come out, the guidance that has come out says that the statutory requirement to provide an annual report still stands. However, what we now need to do as a group of leaders is make an intelligent decision about that. And depending upon the context of your school, depending upon what information you may or may not have already sent home earlier in the year. My suggestion is that you simply strip back that requirement to the minimum that is necessary and appropriate. What's far more important at the moment is making sure that we're sustaining good quality contact with those families and children we believe to be most at risk and vulnerable, both in terms of their welfare, but also in terms of their learning. But technically, the answer is that the statutory requirement has been insisted on. The second part of that is appraisals. So this is to do with staff performance management. The answer is, once again, those regulations have not been relaxed, but my advice to you is very straightforward, that it would be inappropriate to conduct any form of appraisal at this point, and that any performance management related processes can sensibly and appropriately be paused, not least because any objectives are going to be subject to review anyway. I'm just going to pick up one of the others here, which is, it's the question from Liz about sending home bubbles only after a positive test. And it kind of really reflects what is a deeply distorted view, which is that children somehow are not affected by COVID-19. Now, we know, of course, that the numbers who exhibit significant levels of symptoms are low, but their infection rates are as high as any other group within society. But they display it asymptomatically. They are infected, but they don't display it. So the answer to your question is that, of course, when there's a positive test, you would send that bubble home. But as a school leader, I'm afraid to say you've actually got to be much more proactive than that in believing and having confidence in a view that says that health and safety operates on a precautionary principle. If you have reason to believe that the environment in which your staff are working or the children are learning is not safe, then you should make a decision to temporarily suspend that provision. It's just a letter to parents, it's an explanation, however difficult that may be, but you cannot continue to make that provision if it's unsafe. Straightforward.
Thank you. Amanda.
I agree completely. You won't be surprised to hear with what Robin said. We have had some schools in which it's been very difficult for school leaders because they've been faced with this conflicting advice about what to do. The union's position is very much that, as we said before, we're here for safety, and because there is a delay in tracing and testing, that you will need to make a decision as to whether or not the bubble goes home, and wider than that, depending on exactly who it is that's been thought to have got the infection. So definitely not just for testing. On appraisal, we believe that for appraisal for pay progression purposes shouldn't be happening. There may be a need for, or you may want to consider, appraisal around professional development for the future. At the moment, obviously, we're in a difficult and different kind of scenario. But the only way we can see that appraisal for pay progression it would just not be a fair process given the different ways in which people are working. So our view is no, appraisal shouldn't be taking place, although there may be professional development issues for the longer term.
Thank you very much, you two. And exactly as both Robin and Amanda highlighted, I know that my own local authority were sent information regarding the need to test, track and isolate, to come up with a local authority plan around this, and they've been told, like many local authorities, to produce this by the end of June. So that isn't in place. I mean, there is a national one in place, but it doesn't mean necessarily that your local one is in place. So it has to be more than just the test, track and trace and isolate. And it's also keeping up to date, it's knowing where your local authority is regards to that, because even if you are a MAT or an academy, it will be your local authority that will be looking to make sure that system is in place. So absolutely keep asking those questions. Okay, I've got some more questions here. Anne Swift, have we any advice for leaders when dealing with governors who are putting pressure on their head teachers to open more widely and questioning their decisions? Ari, the issue, some are not as supportive as they should be, which I highlighted at the beginning. And a question from Simon: does Robin's answer about the 5 tests mean that they will be reviewed locally, regionally perhaps, rather than nationally? And a question from Leslie: I have heard of staff who are anxious about coming in, even though schools need them to cover classes. They are not in a vulnerable group, but their own children are anxious too and don't want to go back to school. How long can we allow them to work from home? And I'll come to Robin first.
Okay, I'll pick up different pieces there. Firstly, around the 5 tests, I think that question came from Simon. Thank you, Simon. The answer is that there will still be a national response on this. There is still a national position in relation to whether or not schools are being expected to open prematurely and the scale of that. And I've said previously, and I think it's important that people hear it, that currently in this country, we are in the process of opening our schools more widely to more pupils than has been done in any other European country at a point closer to peak infection after having had one of the highest levels of fatalities. So it's absolutely right that the union is expressing serious concern about premature opening. But I do think it's worth going one step further here. So I'm going to speak from my own local context. I had a meeting with the Director of Public Health in Southend, and I put to him a straightforward question. Is there a significant and sustained downward trend in rates of infection in the Southend area and the number of reported cases, both positive but also incidents in hospital and fatalities? The answer on every single one of those questions was yes. Now, that's a really clear piece of advice from a public health professional, an independent public health professional. And we know that if that same question was asked in Barrow-in-Furness, you get a different answer. And therefore, although the union will have a national position, it is quite right that school leaders are seeking to make their judgments based on information that is more local. I'm going to just pick up on the other piece, and there was the question from Anne around pressure from governors, and I think we may not have fully answered. I think it was Claire from Sunderland had a question around pressure from partner agencies in social care, but we could argue this about the pressure from head teachers and school leaders that's coming from any direction that you like, including, I'm going to be honest, including our own school union reps on occasions. So I think that there's been a question in the chat around that as well. And the answer is that if you map out the pressures on school leaders and where they come from, particularly in times of significant challenge, the answer is that there are a huge range of different pressures being put on us at all times. That's why, number one, we should be communicating with each other, sticking together, working cooperatively with our staff, doing everything we can to make sure that what we're doing within our own schools has been consulted on, maybe not in the extensive over time ways because we're under so much pressure, but at least it's been fully and carefully considered. And if we then do that, and we have been shown to be true to our values, behaving with care and consistency towards our staff, attentive to the guidance, both the guidance that comes from the government, but also the very helpful additional checklists from the union. If we show ourselves to be attentive to that, and we're clear, and we can say we've done this because, then we are all in a safe position when it comes to governors who overstep the mark or start putting on too much pressure, parents who do the same, because we can say we've made this decision because. And I think it's basing what we're doing on sound principles and that good advice and guidance, and then you get your position of robust defence if you need it. I hope that's helpful.
Thank you. Amanda?
I was just going to add on the point about a member of staff who's anxious about coming into school, even though they're not in one of the clinically vulnerable groups. And just wanted to clarify, as I said earlier, that there will be other members of staff who are certainly at higher risk. They may not be in the government's clinically extremely vulnerable or clinically vulnerable groups, but they will be at high risk. And there will be people who are extremely anxious about coming to work. Obviously, they'll be okay working from home, but actually coming in on site. I think that is something that you will have to assess. If you think that there is a real concern about that, then that's for you to agree that they work, but they work in a way which is safe for them. If, however, you actually think that the anxiety has passed a level that is reasonable in their circumstances, then what we're saying to members who feel that is that they should seek additional support from their GP or any other reasons around anxiety, because they can be all, anxiety can be a term that covers a whole range of anything from feeling a bit nervous up to a medical condition. So it is something for you to assess, and if you aren't sure about that, to seek for further evidence and guidance on it. But obviously what we're looking for is for everyone to feel comfortable and safe coming into work, just as you've been doing over all this period.
Thank you. And just in addition to that, I mean, with large numbers of people still being at home, there should still be a lot of work that can be done from home with regards to those people. And it is about having those conversations, and sometimes that duty of care is very, very difficult to manage when you've got a school that you want to get up and running and you want the pupils to be in there. Okay, I've got a few more questions. So some of them are for clarification. So question from Leslie Jackson. I've heard of staff, done that one, sorry. Tom Bishop, related to the pay appraisal, what about teachers who want to advance to UPS? He wasn't sure that was covered. And John Connolly from Shropshire, please could you clarify Amanda Brown's point on appraisals? Does this mean we should not be putting colleagues onto the next scale? And then a question from Anne-Marie Frost. When is it okay to bring staff back to prepare for the wider reopening of schools? And I wanted to just comment on regards to moving people to the next stages, just like the NQTs should be moved on. If there was no issue prior to COVID-19, then these staff should be moved on to the next level. These are extenuating, unprecedented circumstances. If there was an issue before, then obviously that member would know about it and they would be able to have those conversations with you as they're going forward. But anyone else, exactly like NQTs, if they were on the same trajectory to pass and everything they're doing was working fine, then absolutely they should be moved on to the next level. I don't know if my other two colleagues want to say anything further. But it was around also, when is it okay to bring staff back? So I'll come to you, Robin.
Yeah, just picking up the pay point. First of all, sometimes it can be difficult to give really clear advice because schools, academies, independent schools, colleges all have slightly different pay policies. So the starting point for this one is that whatever you do should be consistent with your published school pay policy. And the second is absolutely at the heart of what Amanda just said, which is there should be no detriment. Nobody should miss out on progression simply because schools have been closed for this period or they've been working from home for this period, or that they have been shielding because of health conditions for this period. Nobody should face any detriment in that context. At which point, in the specific regards of a UPS progression, it will depend precisely how the institution operates UPS. It does work in slightly different ways in slightly different institutions, but the key is that that process should proceed with no detriment. If that means delaying a deadline for some reason, making consideration later in the autumn, then that's when it should happen. I also want to pick up a little bit around some of the comments about people returning, people working at home. And I'm going to speak from just personal experience. On the day back in March that I had my final staff meeting with my colleagues, it was the Friday when we were about to go home, I was very open with them. And I said, from this point on, it's going to feel on occasions very unfair. And it's going to feel unfair because as school closes, there are colleagues who will continue to have to work the same number of hours they always have done. My finance team, for example, have been absolutely superb in sustaining that work consistently. They've still had all the jobs to do, all the bills to pay. There have been other colleagues for whom, because their work tends to be very classroom focused and only exists when pupils are in classrooms, they've had much less to do. And we have to accept that the test is not fairness. The test is whether each individual in their context and circumstances is fulfilling the most that can be reasonably expected of their role in employment. And that might be from home. If they are on site, it's on site. And that is going to be so hugely varied. And it depends here on your knowledge of the individuals. It depends on your sensitive management of any personal issues that they may be facing. I've got colleagues with really challenging childcare situations. I've got colleagues who have got living with people who are seriously unwell. I won't go into the details, but the list continues. And in each of those cases, you have to be mindful of those individual circumstances. You have to treat them confidentially. You can't tell somebody else why John isn't in school, but Peter is in school. You have to deal with each of them individually in accordance with the kind of guidance that we know the NEU's provided, particularly the latest update that's come out today.
Thank you very much. Amanda, did you want to come on anything further?
I agree completely with everything that's been said on that. The only thing that I might add, which is that we're looking at some of the difficulties going forward about what education will look like in the future, because as well as those who are working on site and those who are working from home, and some who might be doing both, we will need to look possibly for the rest of the term and into the next academic year about how learning is arranged, and therefore what that means for workload for your individual members of staff and how that can be best arranged. So as well as the points that Robin was just making about taking into account people's personal situations, which you may not be able to share with other colleagues, looking at how education actually works in the future is really a key issue for us. At the moment, we're told that coronavirus, there may be another spike in a few months' time. That could actually be in September or October. And we're also being told that it may be that it's something that we have to learn to live with, and that there will be spikes in the future on occasion. So we need to think about this, obviously, for the immediate, but also longer term, what education will look like. So thinking about in the immediate future what that means for colleagues' workload, particularly if they are working both from home and on site in school, and also how others work is going to be a really key issue for the future, I think.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. And I want to echo that, actually, that Amanda said. Very much of the National Education Union stuff that you're seeing is the reactive to how do we make sure that we've got correct risk assessments. Well, firstly, how do we react to the closures? How do we make sure we've got learning going on in schools? How do we make sure our vulnerable pupils are getting their free school meals? All of those things that we've had to be reacting to since the lockdown started. But the National Education Union, in also, as well as dealing with the reactive stuff and getting out risk assessments, and when government information comes out, making sure that we've got something usable to go alongside that. We've also, in the background and with members, been having a lot of conversations on what the curriculum looks like. We were hoping before the re-announcement of schools to be open on that Sunday to be looking to launch something around 5 C's, around what learning looks like with regards to creative, community, celebrating, those kind of things, and really looking at what education looks like. We've also been working with Ofqual. We've been having conversations with them. We've been answering their kind of surveys and their questions to us around what should education look like, what's going to happen with the GCSEs and the A-levels straight away. And we did videos for pupils so that they could get a response, because the government hadn't done anything. So in the background, we're also doing all of those things. So please do feel free to ask those questions as well of your Leadership Council members, because we are doing more than just reactive, and all of these things will come into play around blended learning, where we're part at home, part at school, as we move on with regards to education. I don't need to say to you, but absolutely the press information around schools and needing to get vulnerable people in. We've had our vulnerable pupils in school. We've been caring for them. These are people in our community that we absolutely care about. We know their lives, we know their families, and So we are thinking around those things as well. So please do get in touch with your council members if you wanted to have conversations around that and have an input. And I guess really to sum up, I just want to say that government guidance won't stop coming, public health stuff won't stop coming, but try and get the really good information off of that. Like Robin said, it's good to have those conversations with public health in your area to find out what's going on. The NEU hope that the information we're providing is helpful for you. Please do note in the chat if we can do anything more with regards to that. We are working on, and one of the questions that Carrie had was around the NHS. We are working on, and we want to get out by the end of this week something a bit more detailed around vulnerable, around risk, high risk members. But we have to make sure that's right, because we are not going to put out stuff and then take it back. We want to make sure when we put it out, it's right the first time. So it goes through our legal team and it's absolutely checked with members of the executive as well. I know you're exhausted. I know this is relentless. And I know that so many times it's absolutely hugely confusing, but you are in a union, and we are the second largest leadership union, and collectively and cooperatively working is what will be helpful to you. Please do not feel alone. I say this every time since I've been the president, and even before, when I was a young teachers officer, when we had young teachers, but it'd be a young members officer. The union is the family you choose to join, and you've chose to stay with the National Education Union, whether it be for ethical reasons, whether it be because you feel we give the best support. Please do not do any of this alone. Please have those conversations. Please ask. And like Robin said right at the start, there are 4 things that you need to be looking at. One is ethically. Is it ethically right to be opening the school, and what are we providing? Secondly, absolutely look after yourself. When you're looking for pupils to return, absolutely have that positive and sustainable and worthwhile. And if it isn't, then maybe look again at changing your opening dates from there. So those are the things that Robin covered at the beginning. And if you want to add into the chat for any other thing that we could offer, we are looking to do some regional ones of these, which hopefully you'll be able to get more involved in with that kind of way. But all I would say to you is thank you very much for staying in the National Education Union. Thank you for your input. Your input helps us make guidance, helps us write policy, and helps us give support to members, whether it be of leadership members or through to school reps, because when we have an open dialogue, it's the best dialogue. And sometimes we hear things like in a family that you don't always get on, you don't always like the things that someone else is saying, but actually we need to listen. And so thank you very much for your time. Robin and Amanda, did you want to add anything before we close the meeting?
I just want to say thank you very much to all the people who've listened in tonight. The comments, queries, questions, the one thing that they all do, whether they're challenging or whether they're just questions of detail, the one thing they do is that they show that we're all in this together. Leadership in our schools and colleges has never been more exposed in a system that is so fragmented. And many of us don't have the support of close-knit families, of schools in local authorities or in other contexts. And what we need right now is to sustain our connections, keep talking to each other, make sure the decisions we're making in our school have been talked through with other local schools, make sure we keep that connection through the National Education Union, because it is undoubtedly true that together we're stronger. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Amanda?
And I'll just say thank you to everyone for joining. As well as trying to answer the questions, it's very interesting to hear what people are raising, because it's through that we can really develop our advice. And so that's really helpful to us. We're hoping, although it seems difficult at the moment, that actually we will learn lessons from this, which will help us to take forward our kind of manifesto for how we want education to be, the education that we want for the future. So although it seems difficult at the moment and is very difficult on a daily basis, we hope that some good will eventually come out of this. But thank you very much for joining.